Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you on Tag Tuesday. It's a sunny and actually temperate day here in Boston. It does not require winter clothing to step outside and survive, which is amazing. So that is wonderful. And according to the weather forecast, more is on the way. Warm weather, actually warm weather. If it gets up to 85 degrees Fahrenheit here, I will finally be comfortable, which would be great. I might be able to open a window. But I was looking around for tags, and I saw Brian at Bookish, my arch nemesis, one of my many arch nemeses, did the Shakespeare Tag. And I watched his tag. I thought it was hilarious. And when I finished, I was cursing his name, as I usually do, and I thought, why didn't you tag me, you bastard? And then I remembered that Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse did tag me, and I didn't do it. So he was probably cursing me in the same way. So I had been tagged on this, but I'd searched my channel a little, and I don't think I've ever done this. So we're just gonna bowl ahead. So it was created by Libby Stephenson. I'll leave a link to her channel, and I'll leave a link to Jason's video as well, and maybe Brian's as well. And the questions are very simple. They are designed to give sort of a sonar outline of your relationship with Shakespeare. Always fun to do, always fun to know, especially, like, for instance, there are quite a few of you who are new to this channel. You might not know, you might not have delved through 3,000 videos, but you might also have, it might not have occurred to other booktubers to give you this kind of sonogram of their relationship with Shakespeare. So that's what these questions are for. We'll just go through them. Number one is, what was your first exposure to Shakespeare? My very first exposure to Shakespeare was to his sonnets. But I'm pretty sure this question means your first exposure to Shakespeare's plays, and my first exposure to his plays, believe it or not, was not in written form. It was on stage in London. I saw a performance of one of his plays on stage in London with a pair of old friends, and that was my first exposure to this playwright. Then I came to him in written form. I thought it was hilarious that Brian, in his video, somewhat shamefacedly said that his first exposure to Shakespeare was Gilligan's Island. Those of you who aren't from America, that was an old sitcom from decades and decades and decades ago, but a group of castaways on a desert island and their various wacky adventures. And as Brian points out, one of the plot devices was to have strangers wash up on the island. I mean, there are only a limited number of adventures these people can have that don't involve Sodom and Gomorrah if you don't have strangers wash up on the island. And I wanted to reach through the screen, and first of all, I wanted to reach through the screen and face smooch with Brian's enormous dog, Zelda, whose face we have never seen on his channel. Because he somehow, for some reason, he doesn't want to pick her up and put her in his lap the way I do with the bean. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe that she weighs 180 pounds, but that shouldn't let him get in the way. But I wanted to tell him, you have no cause for shame if your introduction to Shakespeare was the great actor Phil Silvers, who is the actor he's referring to in the episode of Gilligan's Island that he mentions, where the Hollywood, the Broadway producer Harold Hecuba washes up on the island, played by Phil Silvers, who had his own show. His own show is sublime comedy. It is just so good. It's not in sitcom, it's not in reruns anywhere. I don't think that it's on any kind of streaming service, but the Phil Silvers show is brilliant, just brilliant. But he was brilliant in anything he did. He's great in comedy, and his portrayal of Harold Hecuba is wonderful. Just brochettes every Broadway producer that Phil Silvers himself ever knew. and at one point, Harold Hecuba, in just tempestuous outrage, decides that the version of Hamlet that they're trying to put on would be better if Harold Hecuba himself played all the parts. And it destroys him, but it does. Not only is Harold Hecuba a perfect commentary on all of the egotistical Broadway producers that Phil Silvers ever knew, but it's also his chance to just dramatize their fate. It's just wonderful, just a wonderful episode. So you have no shame in that game. Right? And question number 2 is, which Shakespeare plays and poems have you read? I've read all of them many times. Question number 3 is, which ones have you seen either on stage or on film? I have seen all the plays on stage, many of them many times, and I've seen all of the big marquee adaptations, and quite a few of the minor ones as well. I've seen all, like the whole run of the BBC. Jonathan Miller did a whole run of closed set televised plays for the BBC. I've seen all of those many, many times. And all of the major and minor movies. I have all sorts of opinions about those. I know that in the Shakespeare savvy waters of BookTube, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet usually gets disdainful looks. I myself think it's brilliant. And I can defend that statement too. I won't bother to pick fights with anybody. But I'm not just saying it's brilliant, but who knows, because these are all opinions. You all know I don't have any patience with that kind of talk. If I want to tell you that I just like something even though I can't defend it artistically, I will tell you that. If I think it's brilliant, then that's what I'll say. I think the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet is brilliant. And even if I didn't already think that, my God, from the standpoint of a teacher, I would think that in spades. but we'll get to that. But I've seen the whole list of them. All of the major marquee stuff. Unfortunately, Shakespeare done by Hollywood is usually a terrible match, just terrible. Brings out the worst in Shakespeare's plays and the worst in all of its directors and performers. Although there are many, many exceptions to that, and of course, I kneel at the altar of Kenneth Branagh's Shakespeare adaptations. They are incredible. But let's see here. Question number 4: do you have a favorite edition of the complete works? I do. You can actually see it right there. I don't know why. It's not all that great critically. It's not. I have the Riverside Shakespeare, the great Brown second edition of the Riverside Shakespeare, which is the chef's kiss when it comes to a critical Shakespeare collection. The essays, the notes, everything is just great about that edition. This running press Shakespeare paperback doesn't have any of that. It's just a big fat paperback of all of Shakespeare. It's not even that sturdy. I've had to reinforce that copy a few times, and back when bookstores were open, used bookstores, I was often looking for a replacement volume. But I still love it. I don't really know why. When it comes to your favorite of something, you're not really obliged to have anything work by rule or measure, right? I just do. It happens to be my favorite. I don't know if you can get closer to see that. No, it's right alongside Conan, but well, I guess they belong together. Question number 5 is, what is your favorite comedy? I ruffle lots of Shakespeare aficionado feathers by saying that I don't think any of the comedies really work. I don't. Comedy, just in general, just as a type of literature, is the most prone to spoiling. Not in terms of giving away the plot, but in terms of going stale, in terms of becoming incomprehensible. Comedy is very much more of the moment than tragedy is. So a huge number of the jokes and word plays in Shakespeare, just in general, but especially concentrated in the comedies, I don't think work at all. I would be predictable here and just say Twelfth Night, because Twelfth Night is wonderful, and a lot of the comedy works in it anyway. Although Much Ado has quite a bit of effective comedy in it too. I'm not a big fan of the comedies, so I probably Twelfth Night, but it wouldn't be a hotly contested field. Then question number 6 is, what is your favorite history play? That is easy. Henry VIII is my favorite, even though it's right on the border of between being a history play and being some sort of pageant play. Even so, it's about history from Shakespeare's own day, and I love it, just love it. I recognize all of its deficiencies as a work of stage drama, but I think Shakespeare would have too. I think he brought him forward. He'd say the same in time. He'd say the same thing. If you pointed out to him, this doesn't have much in the way of these classical Aristotelian unities. It has weird rises and falls rather than an arc of a plot or anything like that. I think he'd agree. I don't think that takes away from the power of the work at all. And then question number 7 is your favorite tragedy. For me, it would be Julius Caesar. I know that the gigantic tragedies, the ones that are re-performed everywhere all the time, are the natural answers here. But Julius Caesar, I think, is extremely effective, and certainly my favorite. If we're talking just personal favorites, Julius Caesar. And question number 8 is my least favorite play. I think probably it would be Titus Andronicus, and that doesn't seem fair to Shakespeare, but probably it would be that, just because I don't think anything in it works at all on any level except one. Except one level, the one level that is always catnip for certain directors, certain viewers. None of it works for me, but then again, I have a slightly heretical viewpoint when it comes to Shakespeare of sort of viewing him. I view him in the company of his peers and colleagues. I don't view him as a god. So out of all the plays that we have from him, I think quite a few of them don't really work. And I don't see any heresy in that. If we had an equal number of plays from any of his contemporaries, I'm sure that the spread would be about the same. I'm not, in case any of you were confused on the point, I'm not Harold Bloom. I don't think that this particular writer was divine. So least favorite, Titus Andronicus is a soiling experience to read or to watch, but there could be others. Question number 9 is, which play would you want to direct? Oh God, none. None whatsoever. No, I wouldn't get anywhere near it. Question number 10 is, which lesser-known play do you think deserves more attention, or which lesser-known play are you most excited about? I would nominate Henry VIII again. I know that the typical answer here is usually King John or Richard II, but Henry VIII, I don't think, it not only doesn't get the amount of attention that I think it deserves for its line-by-line brilliance, but even the line-by-line brilliance is attacked by people who say that Shakespeare didn't write it, or that he wrote only parts of it, or that he wrote only small parts of it. So that naturally relegates it. You know, if you're a Shakespeare company, semi-professional or professional Shakespeare company at a big city or a middling city somewhere in the United States or the UK, and you've got a budget for the whole year, and you're going to put on 4 plays in the course of a year, and you're going to have, the budget is for publicizing them, and the space, and the upkeep, and the props, and the actors, and the insurance, and everything, and you know that you want one of them to be Shakespeare. Not a lot of managers there are going to go for Henry VIII, and as a result, and they're going to, when they're looking it over, they'll say things like that. They'll say things like, do we even know that it's Shakespeare? Things like that. Unless people do Henry VIII because they want to make a crude political point, as has been done. It's the many misuses Shakespeare can be put to, but I would still nominate Henry VIII. It's not well enough known, I think. And then the bonus question, if relevant, is, what is your favorite play to teach or perform? Well, let's leave performing for another day that we are never going to get to. But teaching, I've taught a lot of Shakespeare. And my comments about Romeo and Juliet, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, the reason why I say that is especially a gift to teachers is because it will hold the interest of a room full of high school students. And the Zeffirelli version of Romeo and Juliet most certainly will not, and reading the play will not. But Romeo and Juliet, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, will hold their interest. Without doing, in my opinion, I know this is where the howls of protest usually occur in my personal and my face-to-face conversations, without doing the play any serious violence. Except for the bad acting. Leonardo DiCaprio is a terrible actor. I know that I now live in a world in which Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are venerated as great actors, and the older they get, the more that will happen. But I don't have to agree with it in the privacy of my own YouTube videos now, do I? But Romeo and Juliet is a gift to teachers for that reluctant class of students. I have seen it work its wonders. That's not why Baz Luhrmann made it that way, but it definitely works that way. The one Shakespeare play that I've taught the most, and the one that I am able, just because of the Shakespeare play itself, just because of the raw material, the source material, the one play that I am able to overcome those deficiencies with without any aids, without showing any kind of movie, is Hamlet. That is the one where I can get even the jocks who are making a display of how bored they are, the ones in the back of the room, I can get even them to pay attention. Not only to pay attention, but to be interested. That's my favorite one to teach by far, because of that. Because I'm not tech savvy, and I also, when I taught, I was just old school enough to think that a teacher who needs to wheel in a movie or something like that isn't as strong a teacher, as an effective a teacher, as one who doesn't need to do that. And and I freely broke my own advice, because whenever I had stuff like that would work, I did use it. Except with Hamlet. I don't need it with Hamlet. You get me going with Hamlet, you get everybody, the one thing I need is for everybody to be familiar with the play. And I would always tell my students that you might think what I mean by that is you have to read it. But I know that some of you aren't going to read this no matter what. That you're coming to class, and you know that if you read the material, the class would be interesting. and that the one thing you can do to make sure that you are bored for this hour is to not read the material so that you have no idea what I'm talking about. And yet some of you will make that decision. Now, often that decision, that little speech, would cause people to do the reading. I had a higher percentage of my students who did the reading than most of my colleagues did, because I'd make that speech. I'd talk directly to them. I would say, you're here. I'm going to talk about this. It is genuinely interesting. It's not just some old guy in the front of the class who thinks it is because he doesn't know what's interesting and what's not. It's genuinely interesting. And I will explain, I will show you how to see that. And we will go through it and have lots of fun while we do that. And the one thing that will stop you from enjoying any of that is if you don't read it. That often worked. But even if they don't read it, I would often tell them, you might think it means that you have to read the play, but I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is you have to be familiar with it. You have to know basically what we're talking about. I would like it if you all read it, but you have to basically know the idea. If you basically know the idea, you'll be hooked in enough so that the conversation will interest you, because believe me, there's so much interesting stuff to talk about in this play. And that often worked. That worked more often. That sometimes worked more often even than a play that I had visuals for, that I had a movie for, or something like that. So it would be Hamlet, even though it's not my favorite Shakespeare play. And there you go. That is Tag Tuesday. That is the Shakespeare Tag, which has apparently been just sitting there forever and ever because Jason tagged me and I somehow missed that. So I abused the good name of Brian at Bookish unjustly. But he'll deserve it sooner or later. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.